Without further ado, Judge Goldenberg.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you to the Justice Association and Todd McFarland, who was president at the time that I was invited to speak. And I think all of you are going to thank the Justice Association because so many of the board of directors and so many of the members said, what influenced you? What did you read? What should I read? So I did 36 pages of materials that have excerpts that affected me when I was writing my book and affected me as I discovered the trends that appeared in my chambers. I did not know that when I came into the family court that I would be staying in the family court for nearly 17 years, and that I would preside over the period of time in America of the greatest change in the definition of family. You'll read over and over again that the last time that I've been on the bench is a dramatic transformation in family structure and family dynamics. And I saw it happen before it hit the newspapers. So let's talk about some of the trends, where they came from, where they are, where they're going. The first trend occurred in about 2008. And I was sitting during one of my dockets and realized that nearly every case that I was presiding over was a paternity. And I said, what is going on? Fast forward to 2012, 41% of all children born in America are born to unwed mothers. What does that mean? Any man who has sex in the state of Florida that is unprotected and doesn't use a condom should anticipate that he is going to pay on an average of 18% of his net income for 18 years to a woman whose last name he might not know. And understand that the woman is a sole custodian at the time of the birth of the child, so she can be off to Alaska with that 18% of the net income before he can get to court to assert his rights. And if he has signed the birth certificate, and I've given you a link to the acknowledgement of paternity, take a look at it and see what an average person signing that would ever turn to the back of the contract and read it or understand the word rescission. Because when they come to my courtroom, I can't give them a paternity test if they have not rescinded that acknowledgement within 60 days of the birth of the child. There's a fabulous article, I've given you excerpts, by Sue Robbins in the Florida Bar Journal called Fatherhood in Florida, which will give you a good idea of what Florida law is. But know that a man in Florida has to come to court and affirmatively seek his rights. And if he doesn't do that in a timely fashion, this child can be adopted out from under him, and he can't stop the adoption. Now, what happens if the man is having an affair with a married woman? Well, that child belongs to the marriage, and he can't even assert his paternity rights to that child. And what happens if a married man in an intact family is having an affair and there's a child born? Well, that 18% of net income goes first to that child. Now, there's an article about Dan Marino that I've given you. He has 6 children in his intact family. And he had a child, and we're talking big dollars here, millions and millions of dollars. Because he doesn't have a court order for payment of child support for those 6 children, this baby goes to the top for that average of 18%. These cases are challenges for family court judges. The people seem like they're strangers. They seem young. They seem as though they're meager means. And what do the statistics show? They're not teenagers. The teenage birth rate has dropped 30 to 40%. They're mostly young women in their 20s, young men in their 20s, and only 23% of the mothers are living with the biological father at the time of the birth, a small minority. Their average income is $23,000, and they are only going to live together for an average of 22 months. So where does this come from? In my opinion, the acceptance of unwed mothers, the acceptance of cohabitation, comes from our royalty in America, our movie stars, our celebrities. In 2005, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt got pregnant. In 2008, I had an explosion in my courtroom. Where are we going, though? The numbers have remained stable for the last 5 years. I think we've hit the top. Now, although I have the discretion and jurisdiction to make determinations about the best interests of a child of two total strangers, I do not have the jurisdiction and discretion to address the best interests of a child born to a legal marriage of two parents of the same sex. That is up before the Supreme Court in a case not directly on that issue. It's in your materials, TMH and DMT. And if the Supreme Court determines that both of these mothers are the parents of this child, then we may see a direct authorization for trial judges to address the best interests of children of same-sex partnerships, just the way in 1977 the Supreme Court did it in paternity. In family court, most of what I deal with are people who are representing themselves. 65% of them are representing themselves. Another 15% of the cases may have an attorney on one side. Only about 20% of the cases I see in family court have lawyers on both sides. On one of my pro se days, those are your unrepresented party days where I do all unrepresented parties, it seemed to me that every petitioner was a woman. And the majority of the women petitioners, and by the way, across the board, most filers of divorces are women. Across the board, the majority of them earned more than their husbands. And I said, oh my God, what is going on? So I decided to do some research. And we have the trend of the rise of women. Women make up 47% of the labor force. 65% of married mothers are working. That's doubled. Now, if we look at it, there's going to be a difference in every one of the trends I'm talking about from this point forward, dealing with college-educated and non-college educated. The best way I like it to be determined is, think of it as the hollowing of America, because that's the way they talk about it in relationship issues. In 1970, only about 36% of women went to college and 64% of men went to college. Today, it's flipped. Women have more degrees than men. Undergraduate degrees, 57%. Master's degrees, 60%. Doctorate professional degrees, 52%. The schools are all majorities of women to 60 and 70%. And the traditionally black colleges, it's up to 75% women. I've given you a Boston study in your materials. Go to the actual studies that interest you. And that Boston study, which is in Boys in the Back, a New York Times article by Christina Hoff that I'll be talking about, read the whole article. In 1970, 10% of women had business degrees. Today, 50% of the college-educated women have business. 50% of the business degrees are women. Women's earnings have grown 44% since 1970. Men's, only 6%. But women are still earning 77 cents on the dollar. In Florida, by the way, it's up to 84%. The next statistic that blew up a few months ago was that women are breadwinners in 40% of our families. When I spoke to the Justice Association 8 months ago using statistics from the year before, that was 38%. That is exploding. Again, it's divided into two categories: those women who've attended college and those women who have not. The college-educated breadwinners who are married have a higher income than their husbands, and the family income average is $80,000, which is higher than the median income of $57,100. 63% of that 40% are single moms. They are unwed, they don't have college, they're young, they're primarily minority, and their family income, whether or not they're cohabiting or not, is $23,000. Where are we today? Women are only 21 chief execs of the Fortune 500. Expect that to change. The new class of astronauts, 50% women. And last year, 2012, at the Florida Conference of Circuit Judges, for the first time in 16 years, there was a line at the ladies' room. There were enough female circuit judges to create that line. Now, where did we come from? We know that the women in the 60s, the very, very few who went to law school, ended up being legal secretaries. Think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But what happened in the 70s? In the 70s, three things came together from what I can see from the articles. One, opportunities opened up for women. Women were pushed into maths and sciences and sports, and all of a sudden, women had some value in our society. The culture and climate changed. Everybody was looking to push women into the workplace and push women and their ability to earn. And the third thing that happened was mentorship. And these three things are very important to our society. We had feminism, which said, you can do this. So you had a lot of women who were in the 60s who were stifled for their dreams, all of a sudden going to college and law school and graduate schools in their 30s in the 70s. Again, you're going to see that at the same time from the 70s today, our educational system has become boy-averse. We have an educational system that fosters the way women learn, girls learn, and hinders boys' learning. Read, boys in the back. We now have classes at 90 minutes, even in Broward County, and wherever I could, I gave you articles about Broward County as well. And adults work very well in 90-minute increments, and I've given you some my favorite productivity study for adults. Take a look. Where are we going? Everybody's concerned about when this 40% is going to double to 80%. There's a book by Liza Mundy that just came out called The Richer Sex that says it's going to take a generation. There are other people who say 10 years, women are going to be in the majority of breadwinners. That's not the issue for me. The issue is when we are going to change from propelling women to the workplace to propelling women into leadership. And we have the culture and climate and the opportunity for that. Both sexes are now on the same page. The studies are showing that 89% of us say it is okay for women to earn more and women to be in leadership positions. 84% of us agree that businesses are not doing enough for gender equity and equal pay for equal work, and not enough for child care when 18% of income is going to child care. We are not happy with women earning 77 cents on a dollar. We want that to change. And what's happening with mentorship? There's a Harvard study that was detailed in the New York Times in your materials. Read it. When Harvard got its first woman president in 2009, she started a gender equity program in the MBA program. And what she did was, in 2009, there were 36% women in the master's business program at Harvard, but only 14% of them were in the top 5% of the class. 3 years of their directed gender equity program, in just 3 years, 40% women were at Harvard Business School, and 38% were in the top 5%. So I think there's going to be an acceleration. We can already see it. What's in the news today? Janet Yellen, a female economist, is going to be head of the Federal Reserve. Let's go to some relationship studies. Now, this is really interesting. In the last 40 years, and I've been involved with families and children for 40 years, we have longitudinal studies from the large group of divorces in the 70s. So we have 40-year studies on relationships that give us a lot of good information. What we have seen is that now marriage is still in the United States, not in a lot of other countries and not in Europe, but in the United States, marriage is the preferred relationship. But marriage has gone down 66% to only 48% of our population, and that's the first time in 70 years. We have a disconnect. Only 34% of us are happy with the changing families and the variety of families and thinking that's a good thing. Now, of the college-educated people in relationships, again, we have the hollowing out of America and the difference between college and non-college educated people. Love this quote. It tells you everything. Quote, "College-educated Americans constitute the winners in our new economy, and they are sticking with long-term marriage as a context for rearing children." Close quote. People entering into marriage are older. Average female, 27, average male, 29. In 1960, 8% of women were 27 when they married, and 13% of men were 29. Now we have 30% on average getting married in their 30s. In our lifetimes, it's expected that 80 to 90% of us will marry. But everything's on its head. It used to be that if a woman married a man who earned less than she did, that marriage would more likely end. Now it's more likely to succeed. It used to be that women didn't marry men with less education, and now women are marrying men with less education in larger numbers. It used to be that if you did not go to college, your marriage was more likely to last. Now your marriage is more likely to last if the woman does go to college. It used to be that if a woman married a traditional man who believed that the woman should stay home and the man should work, that that marriage would last longer. Now, those traditional marriages end faster. Everything is different. The biggest thing that's different is our cultural acceptance of cohabitation. 58% of our population cohabits. And again, there are two categories. And these statistics are glaring. Among college-educated people, they cohabit with the intent to create a commitment to marriage. Only 47% live together, and 53% marry within 3 years if they're white, and if they're a minority, 31%. 88% of college cohabitors will eventually marry. They consider it an economic, productive way to combine a higher income. And yes, their income is higher when they're cohabiting than when they're married and having children. 90% of them wait to have children until they're married. And today, only 1 in 6 of those marriages are going to end in divorce in the first 10 years. Now, what happens to those cohabitors that have a high school education? Their view is no commitment. They consider cohabitation parallel to marriage with kids as mandatory, and marriage is optional. Why? We have a generation of young men with no prospects, so the women in their 20s would rather have short-term unions rather than wait for an uncertain marriage. Only 30% of those will marry within 3 years. 27% will break up. And their incomes are interesting. The single woman is better off alone than cohabiting or married. So where are we going? Where are we going with this? All of the public studies and the public surveys, and understand that I've done tens and thousands of family cases, and most of those surveys are just in the thousands, if that. They're saying that cohabitation is a prerequisite for college-educated people to marry. It's becoming a prerequisite. And what about kids? 2011, we had our lowest birth rate, and we're becoming a minority nation. In 2012, the statistics were that just under 50% of children under the age of 5 were non-white. Everybody talks about marriage being hard. What's hard in our society is raising children. And children are destroying happiness and marriage. In 65% of second marriages, children are the cause of their divorces. 20% of our women are not going to have children, and right now 20% of our men in their 40s don't, and those men in 15 to 44 range, 53% don't have children. And who are the happiest people? The happiest people in America are a married couple with no children who earn between $50,000 and $70,000 a year. The divorce rate's down. But there was one trend that caught me by surprise, and I said, oh my goodness, yes, I see it. Gray marriages, the gray revolution. People over 50 are getting divorced at a higher and higher rate, and women are the filers again, and 28% of people over 50 are getting divorced. Why? A lot of those are your second and third marriages, which raise the percentage to 65%. And they expect a 25% increase in those gray divorces. So the studies show that we have different expectations and different goals for relationships today. So after doing tens of thousands of family cases, here's Judge Goldenberg on a perfect marriage or relationship. In America, we think that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means that we're entitled to 100%, and we go for that 100%. Well, the perfect marriage and the perfect relationship is when you're happy 70% of the time. Think about it. You don't even get along with your siblings who have the same DNA and the same family culture. How do you expect 100% from a relationship with a stranger? There are some prerequisites to getting into what makes a good marriage. And you take a look at the selection process. Great book, The Good Marriage by Judith Wallerstein. Read it. And The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. It's on the bestseller list and explains family culture better than I have time to explain it to you today. So if we start with older people who select properly, and I say use the selection process of the parents who arrange marriages. Now I know that a lot of arranged marriages are forced and a lot of them are not good, but look at it from the perspective of the parents. The first job of parents who are going to do arranged marriages is to screen out the deal breakers. The drug-addicted people, the alcoholics, the people who cannot make commitments. What could go wrong? The next is they screen for race, religion, class, and age. What I've seen over the last 17 years is when I'm doing my pro se docket, my self-represented dockets, and I'm seeing the divorces that are ending in about 2 years or less, when they're walking in the door for the divorce, I'm looking and saying, where were these people ever in the same place at the same time to actually meet, much less get married? So the arranged parents don't have a bad idea. So if you have the proper selection process, know there are a lot of people who can be in that selection process. The grass is not greener. Stick with who you've selected. Now, the foundation of a good marriage or that's your foundation. Now, what makes that foundation strong are 2 other things. There are a total of 3 prongs to what I say is a new marital relationship. The most important prong comes next, and that is intimacy. Not love, intimacy. You must nurture and nurture it in the dark. Nurture that intimacy. And how do you nurture that intimacy when life interferes with the marriage, and right? Life interferes with the relationship, and life is hard. You go away quarterly for 24 hours with your committed partner, with your new best friend, without electronics, without telephones, without children, and outside of your house, and with no one else around. And when you come back from this quarterly respite from life, you're already planning the next one. And that's what keeps your intimacy alive in your relationship. And there's another important part in our society. I am convinced, and have been convinced for 40 years, that living in sunbelts, like in Florida, where we're outside most of the time and not huddled in front of a fireplace in heavy clothing away from everybody else for 10 months of the year, that we have more opportunity for danger to that intimacy and that commitment. So what you need to do is you need to push everybody away, and seriously push away threats to that intimacy. There's a case that I've given you a blurb about from the Iowa Supreme Court. A dentist had a very attractive assistant in Iowa, and he was concerned he was going to be having an affair with her if she stayed around too long, and as a threat to his marriage, and he fired her. She sued him for sexual discrimination, and the Iowa Supreme Court said pushing away somebody to save your marriage is a valid firing. Fire your secretaries if you think, and your staff, and quit your job if you find somebody you're attracted to. The next tip is don't let your spouse go to a high school reunion alone. Remember, in America, we want simplicity. We want to go back. We want to get rid of our anxiety and our stress in our lives. And what gets rid of that but going back to times that were simpler and easier and happier? And people get drunk, and they will proposition your husband or your wife right in front of you, like happened to me. So know that the third prong of it is family support. And that's what we take away from arranged marriages. Who's going to watch those kids while the husband and wife have a respite, that quarterly respite? It has to be the family that supports that commitment. Now, you all think that we come together and we create one. No. 1 and 1 make 3. Partner relationship. And you have to nurture and commit to that third entity, which is the relationship. And the family support, it's okay if they support the partner that is their child, but they have to also respect and support the relationship. And without those 3 things, you can't make it to 70%, and you can't make it to a perfect relationship. So if you're grandparents out there, take your grandkids. Let the parents go away. The interesting part of Judge Goldenberg's view on the breakdown of a marriage is that it's different than you're reading. What I've seen after tens of thousands of cases is that neither party knows the marriage is breaking down at the time that it's breaking down. What happens is one partner comes home and seems somewhat distracted, and the other partner says, you know, you just seem distracted, and they say, oh, there's a lot going on, I'm distracted. First stage of breakdown of intimacy in marriage. Next, the partner seems sad all the time. Oh, you're so sad. Oh, things are tough, you know, with the economy, everything, things are tough, and they're sad. Second stage. Then it goes into deep depression, and you say, my God, you're so depressed, you need to go see somebody. Third stage. The marriage can be saved at this point. You pump up the intimacy. You go away once a month for 6 months instead of quarterly. The next stage is the dangerous stage, and we start to get anger. The partner comes home and says, you know, you're angry all the time. I can't seem to do anything right. Everything I do makes you angry. Dangerous stage. You need to go to marriage counseling and pump up intimacy. Next stage, Adult adolescents, change in hair, change in clothes, change in style, change in hobbies, going to the gym, and all of a sudden, that's the intimacy danger point. And when you go read the Dan Marino article, you're going to see that I bolded a section of it. I bolded the section dealing with the family support and the commitment that makes a marriage survive that stage. If you go back to the commitment and you go back to the intimate relationship, the marriage can survive, but you're getting to a point not so much. Then you get to moving forward, and the partner has spent the last 8 months to 2 years in the intact relationship with neither of them knowing what's going on, getting to the point that they're leaving. They're out of there. They're ready to go elsewhere. And what happens? They pack their bags and they're ready to walk out the door. We're done. We're over. And the other person says, no. Why? Because they're still at the beginning stage. No, you're not going. And they grab their cell phone and they grab their suitcase and clothes. And all of a sudden you have domestic violence. And it is a form of domestic violence. It's called situational domestic violence, the crisis of when one party is leaving without either of them knowing. At this point, I've given you a lot of sections of my book that deal with what you can do to save the marriage at this point. But at this point, it's really too late. The last 3 trends that I'm going to talk about are tied together also by the hollowing out of America, college and not college, but they're tied together by technology. And the first one is our millennials. We don't really pay attention to them, but we should. Those are our 18 to 31-year-olds in our society. Now, Judge Goldenberg says we don't become adults in 2013 till we're 35. But of these millennials, and remember they're 18 to 31, 36% of them are living home, more men than women. Only 25% of them are married. And where do they find themselves when you key it back to the unwed mothers and you key it back to the cohabitation? They cannot expect to earn a median wage of $42,000 until they're 30 years old. The employment rate of our millennials who do not have a college education, 53% are unemployed. They're techies, they were raised on technology, and yet they're going to hold 11 jobs until between 18 and 34. I've given you some articles on employing millennials, how to employ millennials, and how to keep them employed in your companies. But understand the next generation, which is Generation X, the 33 to 50-year-olds, you're going to see why those are caught in the middle, because they're supervising millennials who are just walking out the door if they're not happy. So the hollowing out of America and our economy has made 53% of our young millennials what we call unmarriageable. And we need to address the issue of mentoring our millennials to make them marriageable by the time they're 35, or encourage them like we did the women in the 60s to the 70s of going to college and graduate school in their 30s. The next trend is living alone. There's a great book called Going Solo by Eric Kleinenberg. Read it, fascinating. 50% of us are single. And it's not the wring your hands, oh poor dears of the last generation. These people are really happy and very successful because technology lets them go on FaceTime and Skype and be connected anytime they want. And we all are going to be single more in our lifetimes than we are married. And what does that give us? Flexibility, freedom, personal choice. And women under 45 have higher incomes and are fastest growing in the housing market. 18% of men 40 to 44 that don't have college never are going to marry. 35 to 39-year-olds 22%. Single men without college have less income and fewer prospects than 1970. The third group, my favorite, the boomers. Now, do not call boomers seniors. They are not the seniors of your last generation, and they do not want to be called seniors unless they're asking for a senior discount. That they will take. So these are the people who were born from 1946 to 64, over 50, some say over 55. They are largest in size and percentage of population. The millennials in a decade are going to be 75% of our working population. Singles are 28% of our population. Boomers, 45%. Numbers don't match. But 45% of our population are supposed to be boomers. Now, here's an interesting statistic for all of us in here about our clients. Boomers have 75% of the wealth in our country. And they use the internet more than the millennials. They have spent $7 billion on the internet this year. The internet is where they get their information. Who knew? 3/4 of boomers intend to work past retirement. There are very complex reasons for all of these statistics, and they're in your materials, but that's an amazing statistic. What happens to the Generation X? They can't move up. The boomers aren't leaving. So those who earn $75,000 or more are more likely not to retire. Let's tie this all together. We need to pay attention to who are the people we're going to be serving in the future. And the majority of those people that we're going to be serving in the future are tied together by this technology. And in the meantime, I think we need to get billboards that say, average of 18% of your net income for 18 years, go to college, and use condoms until you do. I'd like to end with quotes from a very famous millennial and an unknown senior of the last generation. Justin Timberlake, great role model for our millennial generation. He was interviewed in the New York Times. Read the interview. It's called The Enduring Multi-Generational Appeal of Justin Timberlake. And there are 2 quotes I take from that article from him. First one, quote, "Technology has jammed so much newness into the culture that the culture has not figured out how to respond yet." Close quote. Technology is driving us. Look at the topics for our subject matter today for lawyers. We are not in control of technology. We are allowing technology to control us. When I turn on the news and what I'm getting is what the Twitter feeds are for the day, and that is our news, then what is happening with how our culture is dealing with technology? And by the way, a little plug, I'm speaking again at 4:15 on e-filing. We're doing e-filing across the board, not just family, and there are some fabulous tips on how to survive e-filing at 4:15. The next quote from Justin Timberlake is, you know, life doesn't happen in black and white. The gray area is where you become an adult. That medium temperature, the gray area, the black between black and white, that's the place where life happens, close quote. That's a different view of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's saying 70% can be perfect. The unknown senior. I was online at the library holding a bestseller, and there was an elderly senior woman holding the same bestseller, and she turned to me and she said, "How old are you?" And I said, 27. And she said, "I'm 83. Let me tell you a secret. I'm really 27 too. My body has just aged around me. So when you're looking at that 45% of our population that are boomers, look in their eyes. Don't look at their outward appearance. They're really only 27. So how does that tie in with us to be lawyers? In my book, I say there are going to be more changes in the practice of law in the next 10 years than there were in the last 100. And I've given you a lot of sections of the Rules of Professional Conduct, but I'd like to read one to you. Rule 4-2.1, Advisor. In representing a client, a lawyer shall exercise independent professional judgment and render candid advice. In rendering advice, a lawyer may refer not only to the law, but to other considerations, such as moral, economic, social, and political factors that may be relevant to the client's situation. I am a family court judge, and every day I see a different definition of the word family changing. Blink and life passes. I've brought you from conception to boomers in 50 minutes. I can't wait to see the next societal shift appear in my courtroom. Thank you for allowing me to share real life.